here we go into stage 3. So as we've already covered, the first stage is the opening phase, where your cervix goes from being closed to 10 centimeters dilated, the size of a bagel. There's nothing blocking the baby's exit. Stage 2, the baby moves from being inside the uterus through the birth canal and now is in your arms. You are holding your baby skin to skin, and we're now at stage 3, which really there's not a lot to say about because it's very much an afterthought. Sometimes people call this the afterbirth, the placenta, the birthing of the placenta. But there are a few important things that are really good to know as you're choosing your caregiver and as you're planning for your birth, because you've gotten all the way to this point as Mother Nature intended it, right? Allowing yourself to be pregnant as long as you needed to be, allowing yourself to labor as long as you needed to, using these amazing techniques of breath and position. And we're going to soon get into the techniques of the mind and the techniques of touch, all of these amazing tools so that you now have your baby safely in your arms, having felt the entire experience, empowered in your body. So this is the end of pregnancy. Once you've birthed the placenta, you are officially no longer pregnant. So let's learn a little bit about it. So when mamas ask about what does it feel like to birth the placenta, all I really have to say is it has no skull. So after having just pushed a baby out, you are really not going to have much of a physical experience of birthing the placenta. Your caregivers are watching to find when you are ready to birth the placenta. And so let's talk about how that happens in the first place, because there are varied policies depending on where you are about how this is handled. And so it's good to understand what Mother Nature intended. It's good to understand why some caregivers do other than Mother Nature intended. And it's also important for you to make some decisions ahead of time so that you know what you're looking for and what to ask for, assuming there's no emergency happening once your baby is born. So the first thing to know is that the way that your body knows that it's time to birth the placenta is that the baby's body sends a signal through the umbilical cord. So the placenta starts to develop as soon as you're pregnant, and it's very important. It's fed your body for your entire pregnancy. It's like a filter system, and it brings blood into the baby's body. It brings nutrients in, it brings excrement out, like it brings oxygen. It is the lifeline for your baby. And since your baby is in the amniotic sac with lungs full of amniotic fluid for your pregnancy, the baby has not breathed yet when it's first emerging from the birth canal. So it's still getting all of the oxygen it needs, all of the nutrients it needs from the placenta. And so there's a heartbeat to the placenta. Like the placenta, the umbilical cord pulses, and it pulses even after your baby is born. Because when your baby is born, this is so cool, as it's going through the birth canal, the baby is being squeezed, of course. Its head's molding, as we've talked about before. Your unencumbered pelvis, all those bones and ligaments are opening so that this miracle can happen in the first place without any issue. And now your baby, as it comes out, goes from being squeezed where the amniotic fluid is actually being squeezed out of its lungs, and then it emerges into all this space and takes its first breath. So when that happens, the lungs open up, and the alveoli and the bronchioles and all the tiny little parts of the lungs connect with the circulatory system, just like we learned in 10th grade biology. And the baby is suddenly now beginning to get oxygen from the lungs. So amazing, for the very first time. And so you watch your baby, they call it pink up, like literally change color before your eyes sometimes, and uh, and start to breathe. So, but when they're first breathing, they're not breathing at 100% capacity necessarily, right? They might have a little bit of amniotic fluid still in their lungs that they're sputtering out. It takes a little bit for them to all these systems to connect. And so while that's happening, the placenta is still bringing oxygen through to the baby through their belly button, through their umbilical cord that's still attached to mama's body. The way that your body knows that it's safe for the placenta to detach from the uterine wall is that the baby's body, once it's breathing at 100% capacity, sends a little message through the umbilical cord that gets to your placenta and says, thank you for your service, you're no longer needed. And then the placenta starts to detach from the uterine wall. And as it does that, then your body releases natural oxytocin as a result of that message that's come through, natural oxytocin. And if you remember, oxytocin makes things contract. And so those blood vessels that have been feeding the placenta slowly close. So most of the blood that is visible when you give birth is the lining of the uterus that it actually sheds for the next bunch of weeks, that has kept the baby all padded and allowed you to get pregnant in the first place. But it's also fresh blood, because as the placenta detaches from the uterine wall, those veins or arteries, which ones are they? I don't know, are slowly closing, and so there is some blood that is spilled that will come out as your baby, as you birth your placenta. The beautiful thing to know is that when you give birth, you have 50% more blood in your body than when you got pregnant. Wow. So Mother Nature has given us an incredible padding for this to happen and for us to bleed some. Of course, your caregiver is watching to make sure that the amount of blood they see is normal. If it's not, then in 9 out of 10 women, if you look her directly in the eyes and you say, stop bleeding, her body will stop bleeding. Pretty amazing. In that 10th woman, this is an emergency. A shot of Pitocin in the leg will make the blood system contract, right? Because Pitocin makes things contract, and the blood will stop. And Pitocin is an amazing lifesaver in an emergency like that. So the reason that I think it's important to know this is so that when you're interviewing caregivers and preparing for your birth, you can ask their stance on allowing this process to happen naturally, right? So this is as Mother Nature intended it, that we do not cut and clamp the cord immediately, that we allow the cord to pulse until your baby's breathing fully. This is completely finished. It stops pulsing on its own. There's a bit of blood that happens, and that's our signal, right? That it's time to birth the placenta. For most mamas, just a couple of pushes or a push. I know for me, I got on a birth stool and seconds later that placenta was born. So that part is not a big deal. But knowing that you're allowed to let it happen the way Mother Nature intended is helpful. And I always think if Mother Nature intended us to cut and clamp the cord right away, we would have an instinct for that, right? In our 9th month of pregnancy, we'd develop a claw, or we'd have an undeniable urge to bite the cord, right? We would cut it, we would tie it, that would be built into us. But that's not what our instinct is. What's our instinct? Our instinct is, give me this baby, right? Bring it to your chest. That's what mamas do when they are handed their baby, is they bring that baby up to their face, their chest, and they gaze at this baby. Well, when you're holding your baby right up to your chest, you are chest to chest with your baby. So your heart is basically at the same level as their heart. One of the reasons that caregivers cut and clamp the cord right away is that they are taught that there's a fear that if the baby is raised too high, then blood could spill out of the baby, too much blood, or if the baby is put down low, too much blood from your body could go into the baby. And therefore it's important to clamp the cord right away. Well, that's not our instinct. I don't know anybody who holds their baby up, when it's still attached to the umbilical cord right after birth, or puts it down on the ground. So knowing that this is your instinct is an important thing. The other piece is that it takes a while for the cord to stop pulsing. And so that means your caregiver needs to stand by. And in a home birth, your caregiver is planning on staying around for a while. But in a hospital, if your caregiver has several people in labor at the same time, they may want to clamp and cut the cord right away, give you a shot of Pitocin, tug on the placenta and get it out, even though that could mean that you have some excessive bleeding. It increases the likelihood of that. The Pitocin, of course, helps because it makes those blood vessels contract and close. But that's an intervention. And so if you've made it all the way through this journey with no interventions, it's just good to know this, right? Am I allowed to let the umbilical cord stop pulsing on its own? And does it need to be cut right away? Can I wait until the placenta is born to cut the cord? So if it doesn't matter to you, great. Then that's not an important question to ask your caregiver. If that feels important to you, then it is. So it's good to understand all of this. And really, you're looking for a caregiver that is in alignment with you. As I've said before, it's much easier to change your caregiver than it is to change your caregiver's mind. So allowing yourself to choose a caregiver that honors your choices. And of course, in the case of emergency, this all flies out the window, and Pitocin is a huge blessing. Necessary intervention is beautiful. Unnecessary intervention, we got to ask why. So you're no longer pregnant. Third stage has completed.